There are moments in history when the fate of civilization hangs by a thread, where a single decision, a single misinterpretation, or a single button press could end the human story. We often think of history as a slow river, but sometimes it is a waterfall. We are traveling back to October 1962. These were the 13 days that nearly ended the world. This wasn't a drill. It was the moment humanity stood at the very edge of the abyss. As we begin this journey, listen to the silence. It is the silence of a world holding its breath, waiting for a flash of light that would signal the end. To understand the crisis, we must understand the era. This was the height of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union were locked in a desperate ideological warfare. It was a contest between capitalism and communism, freedom and control. But beneath the rhetoric lay a terrifying reality: the arms race. Thousands of nuclear weapons were aimed at mutual destruction. The American strategy was known as containment, a policy designed to halt communist expansion globally. But both sides operated under the grim logic of the MAD doctrine, mutually assured destruction. This guaranteed that in a nuclear war, there would be no victor, only victims. The chessboard was global, but the crisis would unfold on a small island in the Caribbean. In 1959, a revolution changed everything. Fidel Castro led a communist revolution that seized control of Cuba. Suddenly, there was trouble in America's backyard. Washington was panicked. A Soviet ally sat just off the coast of Florida. In 1961, the U.S. attempted to fix the problem with force. The Bay of Pigs invasion was launched to overthrow Castro. But it failed spectacularly. It was a humiliation for the United States, and it pushed Castro firmly into the arms of the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the catastrophe to come. The crisis officially began not with an explosion, but with a photograph. On October 14, 1962, an American U-2 spy plane, piloted by Major Richard Heyser, flew a dangerous mission over Cuban territory. When the intelligence analysts developed the film, their blood ran cold. The reconnaissance photos revealed the impossible. Soviet medium-range ballistic missile sites were under construction in the jungle. The Soviets were sneaking nuclear weapons into the Western Hemisphere. Why did this matter? It was a question of geography and time. Cuba sits just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. Before this, Soviet missiles in Russia would take roughly 30 minutes to reach American cities. Enough time to launch a counterattack. But from Cuba, these missiles could strike Washington, D.C. in under 5 minutes. There would be no warning, no time to say goodbye. The strategic balance of power was shattered instantly. Soviet weapons were now positioned at America's very doorstep. President John F. Kennedy knew that panic could be as dangerous as the missiles. He needed a plan. He formed the executive committee, known to history as EXCOMM. This group included his brother Robert Kennedy, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, generals and diplomats. They met in secret, under extreme pressure. The room was filled with conflicting advice. The generals wanted war. The diplomats wanted talk. Kennedy sat at the head of the table, knowing that the wrong choice would be the last choice any president ever made. EXCOMM debated the options. The menu was bleak. Option 1, do nothing. They could accept the missiles as a new reality, but this would make America appear diplomatically weak to the world and encourage further Soviet aggression. Option 2, an airstrike. They could bomb the sites, but this risked escalation and Soviet casualties. Option 3, a full invasion. Deploy ground troops to seize the island. The military favored this, but it guaranteed thousands of deaths and likely a nuclear response. Option 4, a naval blockade. Stop shipments of weapons while maintaining diplomatic pressure. Kennedy made his choice. He rejected the immediate violence of an airstrike. Instead, he chose the naval blockade. But words matter in diplomacy. A blockade is technically an act of war, so Kennedy termed it a quarantine. It was a legal loophole. The objective was clear: prevent new missiles from arriving whilst demanding the removal of existing installations. He was drawing a line in the Atlantic Ocean and daring the Soviets to cross it. For the first week, the crisis was a secret, but secrets like this cannot be kept forever. On October 22, 1962, Kennedy addressed the nation on television. Millions of Americans tuned in, expecting a normal broadcast. Instead, they heard the president reveal the Soviet threat. He delivered a public ultimatum to Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev: remove them or face the consequences. The secret was out. The countdown had begun. The reaction was immediate and terrified. Global panic set in. In grocery stores across America, shelves were emptied as citizens panic-bought supplies. They bought water, canned food, and batteries, preparing for a siege that might last for years. In schools, children performed duck and cover drills, hiding under their wooden desks, as if that would save them from a thermonuclear fireball. Families in suburbs began digging up their backyards to construct fallout shelters. The fear was visceral. While civilians dug shelters, the military prepared for the end. The U.S. military moved to DEFCON 2. This is the highest level of readiness short of actual war. Strategic bombers were kept airborne 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, circling the Arctic. They carried nuclear payloads. On the ground, 145 intercontinental ballistic missiles were fueled and ready to launch. To the Soviets, this looked like preparation for an American first-strike nuclear attack. The tension was so thick it was suffocating. The conflict moved to the United Nations. In a dramatic showdown, U.S. Ambassador Adlai Stevenson confronted the Soviet ambassador. Stevenson demanded an answer regarding the missiles. When the Soviet diplomat stalled, Stevenson famously barked, "Do you have missiles? Don't wait for translation." Then came the reveal. Stevenson unveiled the damning aerial photographs to the entire world. There, on the easels, was the undeniable proof of Soviet deception. The Soviets had been caught lying on the global stage. But photos don't stop ships. Out in the Atlantic, the Soviet fleet was steaming toward the U.S. quarantine line. The U.S. Navy prepared to intercept. This was the eye of the storm. Kennedy gave strict orders for restraint. He knew that one hot-headed captain, one errant shot, could trigger World War III instantly. The world watched as the ships drew closer, waiting for the first blink. Then the shooting started. October 27th became known as Black Saturday, arguably the most dangerous day in human history. Over Cuba, a U-2 spy plane piloted by Major Rudolf Anderson was tracked by Soviet radar. It was shot down by a surface-to-air missile, killing Major Anderson. The first blood had been spilled. American generals demanded immediate retaliation. They wanted to bomb the SAM sites. Kennedy paused. He held back the dogs of war, knowing that retaliation meant escalation. Nuclear war hung by a thread. While the world watched the skies, the real danger was underwater. Soviet submarine B-59 was hiding deep in the Caribbean. U.S. Navy destroyers began dropping depth charges to force it to surface. The submarine rocked violently. Inside, the captain, cut off from Moscow and believing war had already started, ordered the launch of a nuclear torpedo. Launch required authorization from 3 officers. The captain said yes. The political officer said yes. But the third man, Vasily Arkhipov, refused. He stood his ground. His veto prevented a launch that would have vaporized the U.S. fleet and triggered a global thermonuclear catastrophe. He is the man who saved the world. Back in Washington, the confusion deepened. The White House received 2 letters from Khrushchev. The first letter was emotional, almost desperate. Khrushchev wrote, "Let's not pull the knot of war tight." It offered a way out. But before Kennedy could respond, a second letter arrived. This one was hardline and demanding. It demanded the removal of U.S. Jupiter missiles in Turkey in exchange for the withdrawal from Cuba. Which letter was real? Which offer was on the table? It was Robert Kennedy, the president's brother, who came up with the brilliant strategy. He suggested they simply ignore the hostile second letter entirely. Instead, they would respond only to the first emotional letter. They would accept the non-invasion pledge publicly, pretending the demand about Turkey never happened. It was a diplomatic sleight of hand, a gamble that the Soviets wanted a way out just as much as the Americans did. But the Soviets needed a win too. They couldn't just back down. So a secret deal was struck. Publicly, the United States promised never to invade Cuba. This saved face for the Soviets. Privately, however, Robert Kennedy met with the Soviet ambassador. He agreed that the U.S. Jupiter missiles would be removed from Turkey within 6 months. But this part of the deal was top secret. If it leaked, Kennedy would look weak. It was a secret that would stay buried for years. On the morning of October 28, 1962, the tension broke. Moscow radio broadcast a message from Khrushchev. He announced that the missiles in Cuba would be dismantled immediately. The ships turned back. In Havana, Fidel Castro was furious at his exclusion from the negotiations. But the world didn't care about Castro's anger. The world collectively exhaled. The quarantine ended in November. We had looked into the fire, and we had stepped back. The crisis left a permanent mark on history. Both superpowers realized how close they had come to accidental suicide due to miscommunication. As a result, a direct communication line, the famous hotline, was established between Washington and Moscow immediately. Never again would they rely on slow telegrams during a crisis. Furthermore, in 1963, the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty was signed. Diplomacy had triumphed over brinkmanship. The Cuban Missile Crisis remains a terrifying lesson that in the nuclear age, the only winning move is not to play.